Highness the Tsarina Alexandra Feodorovna. Their only son, Alexei, Tsarevich and heir to the throne, 14 years old. The four daughters, the Grand Duchess Olga, 22. The Grand Duchess Tatiana, 18 months younger. The Grand Duchess Mary, 19 years of age. The Grand Duchess Anastasia, at 17, the youngest. The entire ruling imperial family of Russia disappeared on the same day in the year 1918. On July the 17th, 1918, at 2 o'clock in the morning, the Tsar of Russia, his family and servants were hustled downstairs into a basement room and given chairs to sit on. The Tsar sat in the front row, with his little son half asleep on his knees and his wife beside him. His four daughters, the Grand Duchesses, stood behind him and the servants behind them. The guard commander stepped forward and said, "Either the revolution will live or you. Long live the revolution." Then he fired 2 shots, one after another, into the Tsar's head. July the 17th, 1971. For the 53rd year running, the dwindling community of exiled Russians commemorate the death of their emperor. But there are no royal graves, no sacred relics to adore. There are no bodies, no imperial ashes to mourn. These devout services have taken place every year for half a century on a simple assumption. It is that history has accurately recorded the death of the Tsar and his family. But how accurate is that record? How safe is the assumption? This is an investigation into the disappearance and presumed death of 11 people 53 years ago. It's an historically accepted fact that in 1918, the Russian imperial family and its 4 servants were murdered by the Bolsheviks in Siberia. But that fact has always rested on fragile evidence. Not one body, not one photograph, only one suspect eyewitness. What real evidence does exist is strongly circumstantial, superficially convincing. But time has also accumulated considerable evidence of doubt surrounding the murders, evidence that's never been fully revealed, researched, nor analyzed. Evidence that may point to an alternative fate. That is the evidence we're presenting in this investigation. Russia, in the spring of 1917, was entering its 304th unbroken year of imperial rule under the House of Romanov. Nicholas II, as head of the house, had been on the throne for 23 years. He was probably the richest man in the world, with 7 magnificent palaces and a staff of 15,000. The emperor's rule was feudal, ruthless, extravagant, and isolated. But the glitter of the imperial court hid a gigantic base of inefficiency and corruption. Russia, in the spring of 1917, was on the verge of the most radical revolution of all time. She was at war against the Kaiser's Germany, and the war was going badly. Russian losses were catastrophic. At home, the Bolsheviks were leading serious strikes and demonstrations. There were bloody clashes with the police. By March, the Tsarist regime had collapsed, a provisional government was established, and Tsar Nicholas II, emperor of all the Russias, abdicated and with his family went into exile. First at Tsarskoye Selo, some 15 miles from St. Petersburg, then to Tobolsk in Siberia, and finally to Ekaterinburg, the town that was to become famous for their assassination. At Ekaterinburg, close to the front line of the civil war between the Reds and Whites, life became harsh for the family and its handful of servants. Their prison was the Apatyev house, a large, specially commandeered mansion. A high wooden stockade was specially erected around the perimeter, and Red Guards were on duty day and night. For 11 weeks, the family lived behind sealed windows with only occasional exercise periods in the small walled garden. Their routine was to end abruptly in the small hours of July the 17th, 1918. That's the date the imperial family went missing, presumed dead. And according to the history books, it's the night the 300-year-old Russian imperial dynasty was wiped out in the cellar of the Apachev house. Within hours came the first official information about what had happened from a Bolshevik spokesman. That same morning in Ekaterinburg, the military commissar for the area read out a public statement in the local theatre. The Tsar of Russia had been executed, it said, but the rest of the family had been evacuated.
That first public statement was an admitted lie. One of the members of the local Soviet, which was involved in making this pronouncement, later published a book in which he stated quite flatly that all members of the Romanov family had been killed. This was the beginning, this statement, of a series of efforts to confuse, of lies, of concealment, and fabrication on the part of the authorities about this affair, which defies the human brain.
John O'Connor, American lawyer and author, has spent several years analyzing the evidence for the death of the imperial family and finds it unproven. He thinks it significant that, from the start, the local people in Ekaterinburg were unconvinced.
They were apparently smarter than the rest of us because their immediate reaction was incredulity. They just didn't believe it. They couldn't believe that the Tsar, their Tsar, had been killed. And according to General Dietrichs, who was pretty close to the investigation, and other people who were there when that announcement was made, the audience reacted by heckling the speaker. And they actually shouted at him, "Show us the body." And of course, no body has ever been shown. And as a matter of fact, from that day to this, there has never been any official public Soviet pronouncement about what happened to the rest of the family.
As regards the night of the murder, my wife and I were looking out of the window of the consulate, and we saw them putting up machine gun nests all around the house, and nobody was allowed to go past the house. In fact, there was a curfew, and nobody went out in the streets on pain of death.
Sir Thomas Preston was British consul in Ekaterinburg at the time of the assassination. His office was 5 doors away from the Apachev house in Voznesensky Prospect. Sir Thomas is today 85 and lives now in his Norfolk country house. He was in Ekaterinburg when the Tsar disappeared.
I only knew the next day, that when I went to the theater, that they had. And I was told in the street when I met one of the Ural Soviet people that the Tsar had been killed. But they never mentioned the royal family. And I imagine the reason they didn't was because they were frightened of the indignation it might arouse amongst the population. Well, there's a big crowd on the stage of the theater. They were all there, the Ural Soviet, and they were making violent speeches, the gist of which is that the Tsar had been shot, and they were very happy about it, and that he was a hangman and he deserved what he got. It wasn't very pleasant. Then I went off to the telegraph office to send a telegram to Lord Balfour, who was then Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs.
Through the years, Sir Thomas, a civil servant of the highest repute, has become one of the world's leading exponents of the assassination story. Any suggestion that what happened 5 doors away from his consulate may not have been as it seemed has always met with a stiff letter to the Times or a careful and patient restatement of the facts. After all, he was there. Quite properly, he took the Soviet announcement in Ekaterinburg at its face value and informed the Foreign Office accordingly. Yet, proof of that announcement was never to come his way. He never visited the death cellar. He never analyzed the physical evidence. One might add it was not his job to do so. During the ensuing months, Sir Thomas was to report most efficiently what he picked up from subsequent official investigators. But his evidence was that of his ears, not his eyes. Today, in the Foreign Office archives, we've been able to examine the reports sent in during 1918 by other British diplomats. Taken as a whole, they show that diplomatically, the death of the imperial family was never proven. The very first news of the Tsar's assassination reached London from our man in Moscow, Bruce Lockhart. He quoted a good Bolshevik source, which the FO certainly found quite plausible.
We have no information beyond the report which has appeared in the press based on official Russian wireless news, but have no reason to doubt its authenticity.
But London got its reason to doubt a month after the assassination. Dateline Archangel, August the 25th. A Polish officer just back from the area reporting the Empress and her children alive at Verkhoturye, 150 miles north of Ekaterinburg. Obligingly, he enclosed a hand-drawn map. Next, our man in Peking recorded a remarkably similar rumor. The whole family alive at a monastery between Ekaterinburg and the town of Perm. Now, there really was a monastery there, and it was at Verkhoturye. But although the Peking report mentioned 3 sources for the story, an FO man in London chose to minute this information with a colossal squelch.
Rumours of this kind are certain to get about from time to time.
But it was to prove a stubborn rumour. From Vladivostok came a new account from Sir Thomas Preston, now safely arrived from Ekaterinburg.
There is still a possibility of their having been taken north by the Bolsheviks in their retreat to Verkhoturye.
That town, once again. By Christmas 1918, an American ambassador was to send a strange cable to Washington. Nelson Page, ambassador to Rome, sent this dispatch direct to the Secretary of State.
For your confidential information, I learned that in the highest quarters here, it is believed that the Tsar and his family are all alive.
From this mass of conflicting evidence, we've discovered just one report that stands out from the others because it's searching, skeptical, and for once records not just the evidence of the ear, but of the eye. It was sent 3 months after the Tsar's disappearance, direct to the King of England. It records the only visit made by a British diplomat to the scene of the alleged murder. Sir Charles Elliot, British High Commissioner in Siberia.
It will be seen that the statement of the Bolsheviks is the only evidence for the death of the Tsar. And it must be admitted that since the Empress and her children, who are believed to be still alive, have totally disappeared, there's nothing unreasonable in supposing the Tsar to be in the same case.
Apart from his general doubts, Sir Charles records another tantalizing fragment of information, a clue which has cropped up from a variety of sources during our own researches.
On July the 17th, a train with the blinds down left Ekaterinburg for an unknown destination. And it is believed that the surviving members of the imperial family were in it. It is the general opinion that the Empress, her son and 4 daughters were not murdered, but were dispatched on July the 17th to the north or west. It seems probable that the imperial family were disguised before the removal.
I certainly told Sir Charles they were killed, all right.
But he never quite accepted it.
Well, he may have got information from other sources, I don't know. I don't think so, because I was his secret agent. I used to supply him with secret reports every day. I never could understand why that happened.
But the Elliot report, with all its question marks, somehow got buried in the pile of reports that followed it. And 6 months after the alleged assassination, the Foreign Office started receiving committed reports from other diplomats and military intelligence that all the family was dead. The source of most of their information was from the first official investigators who had now arrived on the spot in Ekaterinburg, which had been retaken from the Bolsheviks by White Russians a few days after the disappearance of the Tsar and his family. The first investigator, a military judge, lasted just 13 days before he was sacked. He distinguished himself by ignoring the murder room completely. He did, however, visit a remote glade in the pine woods some 14 miles from the Apachev house, following up reports that the imperial bomb